try to be, as the last presentation, try to make it as, I have interesting things to say, so please stay on. I'm going to revisit this welfare state and migration relationship. I think Joshua Paper's done most of the literature review for me, actually, so I'll skip through some of the things. But usually about this relationship, when you think about it, there's a dominant way of thinking about this. I think, as some of these papers kind of pointed out, that there's a lot of negative sentiments about this in the media, and we hear a lot about, and it has actually intensified ahead of the EU referendum, and as part of this so-called the EU deal that David Cameron negotiated, and part of this was this emergency Brexit. They're supposed to be very important in terms of reducing the draw of the welfare system and so forth. And as a result of this debate around this welfare state and migration, I think EU migrants, but also specifically post-2004 EU migration has been specifically targeted here. People you find in the media, people this is more kind of captured in this this kind of the discourses or the tropes of benefit tourism, and you hear a lot, and it's not really recent actually. This discourses as regardless of the reforms that took place that Joshua was mentioning in 2004, you hear a lot in the media about benefit tourism. It actually extends back to 2004. If you remember, part of this, for the post-accession migration, part of the transnational measures, there were restrictions on benefits. So basically, people were not allowed to apply for benefits unless they were 12 months in consecutive employment. This expired in 2011. So when I did research, as I mentioned later, in 2012, you'd expect they would feel more secure and more protected. So it was a year later after these transition measures kind of happened. You can see some of these headlines are written like, "Why do you think you are kidding, Mr. Cameron, is a great delusion?" So they were talking about the EU deal, basically. So as a result, it's not unsurprising, basically, that a lot of research has been focusing on this, has responded to this kind of media coverage, to this negative sentiment, and part of some of the basically, I think Joshua mentioned the research by Dasman and Frattini, which was widely reported in the media that EU migrants overall they had a positive impact on the British economy and the British welfare state, and there's been counter-argumented claims about this being not true, and I think Migration Watch commissioned their own report about this. So, but generally, I think what this means is that, or generally, this view, I think, which I think is or the perspective has been what I call it here, a host society perspective. So, which actually problematizes or views migrants as problematic and problematizes their contribution to society. So, what this has meant, I think, is that there really is little known about migrants' own experience and perspectives. So, basically, the everyday experience of those receiving welfare support and interaction with welfare authorities, because the debate about threat of benefit tourism has actually shifted the whole attention towards this kind of evaluation of the welfare benefits. So the study, just briefly, it's an ethnographic study that took place in Glasgow in 2012. It focused on Czechs and Slovak nationals who came after 2004. I constructed them as a language-based group, the Czechs and Slovak speaking migrants. And it was a very, very heterogeneous category of people, based not only on ethnicity and nationality, but also in terms of employment. I mean, there were people amongst who were employed, unemployed, in different kinds of employment they were based, and also in terms of gender, social status. The ethnographic study had two aspects, key aspects, I think. One is participant observation and in various sites. For example, I did some 7 months of field work in an information and support center in Glasgow that offers support to these migrants, including support with welfare benefits. And the second aspect of it was following very closely a group of key informants over the course of 12 months. it's very important for the purpose here to mention that the group that I'm focusing here is those who receive some form of benefits. But it wasn't the whole study about them. It's just like a small group within the research group. And the data is including field notes and ethnographic interviews and semi-structured interviews with migrants, also with the service providers. So what did I find in 2012 with other young people to find? But I came across this, my research informants talked a lot about this word, Cancelovali. It's quite an interesting word because it's invented. And it doesn't exist in Slovak, it doesn't exist in Czech. It comes from the English word to cancel. So they had kind of, the word, they had invented a word to describe a certain situation. It basically was they often talked about cancelovali papier, so they cancelled the papers. So this was the expression that they used. So they talked actually, it was a blanket term that they used for all kinds of rejections and application inspections of their welfare payments. So the fact that they created this, they come up with the term, show that the regularity or the prevalence of this and how often they were. So there was what I found is like for those who relying on, as Thomas was saying, relying on some form of payments for, I don't know, because they were working in kind of, I don't know, low-paid jobs and stuff. What they experienced was like suspension, delays, and rejection, and sanctions. And generally in 2012, remember, 2012 is the year after these transitional measures were kind of expired. So expected to kind of some form of people to feel more secure. What I found, there was a heightened sense of anxiety and insecurity. So this is kind of how can we talk about this experience? What does it tell us? Is there any wonder? I mean, this was like, my research also took place during this quite a wider transformation of welfare strategy. I mean, the Welfare Act came in 2012. There was a lot going on about this. There was a lot of there was a high increase in the number of benefit sanctions that took place at that time. I mean, Webster talks about British welfare turning into a secret penal system. What he actually did the research and showed that there are more sanctions or benefit payments than actually court fines in the UK. So that's why he calls it a secret. And then we also, as Louis Vaughan has talked, we've seen the descent of neoliberal government and the punitive state. So basically, this is a context which these experiences of Scantellovania took place. So is there any wonder that this applies also to migrants who are receiving some form of support? Well, this is interesting because Cancellovali is very different from sanction. It actually, sanction entails a wrongdoing. It blames the welfare recipient. It's supposed to have an educative effect or aim to it. But Cancellovania is actually more neutral. It points to malfunction of the welfare system. It's actually the arbitrariness of decision making. And it is in this context, I think, that my research informants they talked about lack, or they were fortunate or unfortunate when they received payments. Oh, I've been lucky this time, because the suspension, these things that were happening so often that they mainly talked about welfare provision as it was governed by luck. It was like somehow a game of chance. If you get it, you are lucky. If you don't, you know. So this kind of, I mean, this Cancellovania itself it brought my attention, or turned my attention now to first what the state is doing here. I mean, rather than looking at what the migrants were doing first. And secondly, what are other experiences or instances which applied specifically to migrants in this context? Because the notion of Cancellovania itself, it tells us that they thought about this or they had a different understanding. And then looking more, what I came across is there were other instances or experiences which applied to migrants. So one of them was the document retention. There were like various IDs taken by welfare authorities, like when people either applied, say, for tax credit and send a document to the, say, HMRC, or when they went to the job center to sign for a routine appointment. So they would have their ID taken, and generally they were suspected as not genuine. And I think I've given this just to give you a sense of how widespread these are. They were in 2012 in 85 passports and 1,000 birth certificates held by Slovak embassy. This is just to give you a sense, because I did my research in Glasgow, so I got this sense by working 7 months, or by volunteering 7 months in this center. So it was quite widespread, but also, thanks. It also has various implications. It was just like taking someone's ID for an unreasonable period of time, and that's it. People wouldn't be able to travel as a result, because some couldn't afford even to go. In some cases, the welfare authorities would give the IDs to the Slovak embassy, and Slovak embassies would kind of either keep them or send them to Slovakia or Czech Republic. And in those cases, what happens is that some people couldn't even manage or couldn't afford to travel to London, let alone to go all the way to Slovakia to get the IDs back. So there was all kind of implications about it. And I think I use the term here, documented citizen, intentionally, because these are not undocumented migrants somehow, because undocumented migrants means like that people don't have not yet legally to reside in the country. These are people who have who are legally allowed to come. Somehow they find themselves without documents. It's a paradoxical category of citizens which are dispossessed of their identification. So, but there were more, which again, this, I think, it's another example of specific which applies to migrants specifically. I'll just one aspect that is in quote by two researching colleagues what they talk about, because one thing to mention is that they didn't sometimes authorities didn't keep just Slovak or Czech IDs. They even kept those issued by the UKBA, their own IDs. And in this case, I mean, these two, they're talking about how they had a resident card kind of kept by the job centers. Basically, this was issued by Liverpool. In the end, it was like the intervention of a local MP for them to get this after a year or something, to get it back. But there was more. I mean, this kind of, it also applies in face-to-face encounters with welfare authorities. And this, I did some of as part of my research, I followed sometimes individuals when they went to the job centers to sign. And certainly there was quite often that they never provided any interpreters, which actually shows some disregard for the public service duties, because by the DW rules and public service duties, they should kind of provide interpreters in cases where people don't speak the language. But also in one-to-one situation, in many cases I had to interpret for people who didn't speak the English in Slovak. And quite often there was no kind of little attempt by the advice workers to develop an understanding. The idea was how to catch them, as it were. Like, I mean, there wasn't like if they didn't speak language or if they had forgotten the paper or something, they would straight away be sanctioned. But also, it wasn't just threatened by sanction, but I think they were also somehow exposed as a deficient and lacking English, made somehow to look stupid. And I think it's kind of this situation of these so-called advice sessions remind of what Garfinkel talks about degradation ceremonies, where the kind of humiliating experience, people came out of this advice session looking terrified. So this is not that they were subjected to this experience all the time, but there was a strong sense of anxiety when visiting job centers, and they had actually come up with a term. They called it policia. So when they go into the job center, they used to say, "Idziemy na policję," so we're going to the police station. So that's how often this. But this kind of, so if you talk about these two experiences of document retention and degradation ceremonies, well, how can we understand them? And I said, in these cases, actually, they applied mainly to migrants. It's not that a lot of welfare recipients who are British, they're not faced with these sanctions. But in this case, it's document retention and these degradation ceremonies, I think they were specific to this group, or that's what I argue, what I found in my research. But I mean, anthropological kind of, if we're trying to understand theoretically, anthropological understanding of states remind us that this kind of mundane, routine practice and encounters with welfare on the ground, they are kind of important part of statecraft, state making. This is how state is built. This is how state on the ground. So the document retention is actually can be read as how state controls the mobility of people. I think Torpe is written a great paper about the invention of passports. But then also the degradation ceremony is an example of how the state works, how it makes itself feel legitimized. Imagine that this kind of, we are surrounded by these discourses and tropes of benefit tourism. That's how it is felt on the ground. But I argue in this paper that this is not just about statecraft, it's also about nation making. This is an important aspect because, as Andreas Wimmer reminds us, welfare, if we understand welfare just not as a policy, or as a part of, but also as a way of controlling the doors to the national home of solidarity, it's actually, it's somehow, I think, it's, in some way the EU citizenship gives the right and or somehow opens the door in theory to them, but so they have this kind of, can we call privileged sense of not sense but entitlements that they have as EU citizens. However restricted they are, they still have an advantage to others non-EU migrants. But here the bordering practice that Gunnar and others talk about, they don't happen in immigration checkpoints. They do happen, these happen in kind of welfare offices and welfare authorities. The immigration, actually welfare authorities become or act as immigration officers in this case. I mean, holding the documents without actually being knowing about what's the document. Well, I mean, without checking it. So what does it mean? I think I read this as a way of making immigrants out of this citizen, or more specifically out of this EU citizen, in the sense that, as I said, the EU citizenship somehow opens the entrance doors to the home of the national home, or to the British national home for these EU nationals. But in practice, these entitlements are questions and distorted. It is like the holding of documents for a longer period of time, being treated with suspicion, mistrust, marked out as other, different. This is a way of like, it's not just like, I think Bridget Anderson talks about failed citizens when welfare recipients go to the, I mean, it is not just like undeserving, actually unwanted as well. Becoming marked out as other, of not being able to speak English, not one of us. And it is actually on the ground in these cases where these kind of boundaries between us and them are drawn, between citizens and immigrants. And it is in this context, I think, that my research informant talked about social welfare being a matter of luck, transformed into some kind of favor bestowed by individual state agents. I think I made the right point. Thank you.